So I'm so excited for this conversation about navigating performance improvement conversations with empathy and clear direction. This webinar is hosted by AllVoices, an anonymous reporting platform built by experts to uncover and resolve workplace issues by giving employees a safe space to speak up. So we actually just launched our own performance improvement tool, and we're really eager to learn more from HR pros about their experiences and advice about performance improvement conversations. All right, let's start with some quick intros. Please introduce yourself and include your name, pronouns, roles, and then how you answered this question when you were little. What do you want to be when you grow up? I'll start. My name is Allie Blunt, she, her. I'm the product marketing manager here at AllVoices. And when I was little, I wanted to be an actress when I grew up. Julie, I'll popcorn it over to you, and then feel free to popcorn it over to someone else when you're done.
Right on. Thanks for having me here. Great to see you all. I'm Julie Rogers, she, her pronouns, and I'm here from San Francisco. I'm a former chief people officer, have been working in the space for almost 30 years, and recently left an in-house operator role in order to start up my own business. So I'm consulting, co-founded a company called Gravitate Partners. We work with organizations to help them establish the sort of foundational background to build high-performing cultures. Jenifer, over to you. Oh, wait, when I grow up. I forgot that one. That's the fun one. So when I was little, people asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, and my answer was pretty much always Wonder Woman.
That's awesome.
The Linda Carter days.
My name's Jen Spafford. I use she, her pronouns. I work for an agency called Transition Projects in Portland, Oregon. I'm their VP of HR, and basically Portland has a pretty bad housing crisis right now, and we're trying to help get people housed who are houseless. I think that when I was little, I definitely didn't think I want to become an HR lady, and I don't think I even knew what that was. I wanted to be something more like a gymnast or a dancer or something exciting, but I do love my career and where I ended up.
Awesome.
And I am Jenna Birkmire. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the people operations manager at AllVoices. So I am a team of one, so kind of taking on all the HR tasks, and really excited to speak performance improvement today as I worked with our product team on developing this. So really excited to see it in use. And when I was younger, aside from being an Olympic swimmer or thinking that I wanted to be an Olympic swimmer, I wanted to be a therapist. So I think that kind of works out in HR, just obviously different titles.
That's great. Thank you all for being here. All right, let's jump into some questions. So let's start with, what are your thoughts on how performance improvement conversations are handled in the space currently?
I can start with that. So I think from a team of one and then also a small team, I think it's handled differently than probably at larger companies. And I think with this, a lot gets just like actual conversations, but not really documented in an actual way. So I think performance improvement, and obviously when we go into the demo later, but having it structured and then also like leading into a path for people is super helpful. And I think a lot of the times it's having conversations and it wasn't put in a structured way. So people don't actually realize that there's a conversation. They just sometimes think it's suggestions. So being able to move into performance improvement where there are structured ways for people to grow, I think that's really a good way to approach it. And then also, I think that sometimes performance improvement is viewed as the last part of the employee's life cycle, and they are put on a performance improvement plan for the end of their career. And I don't think that that really needs to be the case. I do think it can be a conversation to help them grow.
Yeah, riffing off of what you're talking about, Jenna, agree. What I've seen over time, and I've seen many iterations of performance improvement. And it started with kind of like early in my career, it was first warning, second warning, final written warning type of methodology. And what I've the conclusion that I have come to at this point in my career is that there's a lot of emphasis on kind of that end conversation. And there's an incredible amount of opportunity to actually focus on the front end, which is establishing the sort of habits and behaviors and confidence that comes with having regular kind of micro feedback opportunities, ensuring that individuals, when they're getting to the point, yes, we need to have a place for us to actually go through and handle documentation and put it all in one spot when it needs to happen. And there's this really big opportunity on their front end in order to ensure that people are getting positive reinforcement when the work that they're doing is landing the way that it needs to land for the business. And then also just recommendations for how they can tweak their performance if things are landing a little bit off center. So I see that there's an incredible amount of opportunity on both sides, and then also ensuring that it is a conversation and not the signal of the end of somebody's employment situation. And I definitely have some pretty strong views on, you don't even go into performance improvement if the person's not going to be able to actually get to the other side. So yeah, those are my views.
Jenifer, you're muted.
Sorry, I was just saying, I agree with that quite a bit. Transition projects is a union environment too. So we have that piece where we, have to be, warning, verbal warning, written warning. But at the same time, I agree with you that I think that I like to help our managers focus on developing relationships with the employees who report to them as well, and gaining the confidence of those employees. And I think what you said about that sort of micro feedback is really important. Like if you can catch somebody in the actual moment that you see something that's not working right and redirect them, at that point in time, a lot of times you can avoid having to go down the whole progressive discipline route.
Great. I see we have a question. I think it fits in well with one we have in a couple questions, so I'm going to kind of tie that one in. But in the meantime, what do you think are the core principles to consider when having a performance improvement conversation?
I jump in again and say taking that coaching approach, and doing it, doing performance management in a way that allows the employee dignity as well, and the best chance at making improvement. I feel like the more specific you can be with an employee, the more concrete examples you give them instead of sort of a vague feedback that doesn't give them something to actually go on, or, sort of a measurement to tell whether or not, they're having that improvement. I think that if you can focus on that and building trust in the relationship, it's going to be a lot easier for a manager in the long run. And again, a lot less of those performance improvement conversations.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, the clarity is like the key aspect of it. How often do individuals get into a conversation and they're just like given this sort of vague, amorphous stuff that's supposed to be feedback, but it doesn't, like, what do I do with that information? So having clarity is really the first key part of it. I think making sure that it's a two-way conversation is really, really critical.
Yeah.
I like to look at feedback as being this opportunity to actually hear somebody else's perspective of what's happening as well, asking their questions, getting their perspective on it, and then alignment on what next steps are. So making sure that everyone is sort of in play together and in lockstep, and where those milestones are for checking in and ensuring they have the support and resources to actually make progress against what the feedback is and the expectations are.
Yeah, and I think to add on to that, I think a lot of transparency within the conversation, and this builds that trust and also that clarity. And then also, like you said, Julie, knowing where they're going to go and like having those next steps. But I also think optimism is super important to have instead of going into the conversation and making it seem like, as you mentioned, first warning, second warning, third warning, have optimism, like show them that you want them to get better too. Like you want this relationship to progress, because I think, I believe Julie said this before, you don't want to have those conversations if it's going to be the end of their time at the company. So have that optimism in the conversation where show them that you want them to get better and you're there and can help them in any way. I think I think that's one thing that managers need to keep in mind. Like, how do you help them get there? Like what tools and resources can you give to them? So it's not just handing them something, being like, hey, you need to fix this, but actually give them steps that they can take to make those changes.
Yeah, and jumping off that, I think also training managers to have these conversations as well. I know that we have, a bunch of people who are doing really great work as direct service staff, and then they get promoted into management positions. And, they don't necessarily know how to manage, from point A to point B. So giving them that knowledge and empowering them to be the best manager that they can is helpful too.
Yeah. Jenna, I think that segues well into the question. Hi, Jenna. I am also a team of one. I am interested in what your structure or step-by-step process looks like for performance improvement, looking for some comparison or reference to improve the way I approach. You want to take that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the way that I approach it is obviously having a conversation with the manager first, learning the problems, learning what documentation that we have down. And in that conversation with the manager, figuring out, okay, before we go to the employee, or even if they've had conversations, what can we do to get them to where they need to be? Like, what resources do we need to be? Can they supply it, or do we need to like outsource it? So I think that's important before we go have the conversation and put everything in writing. A lot of the times, and I mentioned this in the beginning, especially in smaller teams, maybe things aren't in writing. Maybe these conversations are passing, or like in a one-on-one, like, hey, try to work on this. So I think before the conversations where it's very concrete, like performance improvement plan, figure out what you're going to do. And I like, speaking to Jenifer's point, is this manager like capable of having this conversation? Do they need coaching? Because again, on AllVoices, a lot of our people are first-time managers, so maybe they've never had these conversations before. So how can I, as an HR person, help facilitate these conversations? And then just getting everything documented, I think. And as we go into the demo, we'll definitely see how this flow really helps, because it outlines the steps that like I would go through as an HR leader, and how other people who we spoke to, the flow that they would go through as well. So I think just like making sure that everything's documented, speaking to the manager, and then finally having the conversation, and then also following up with the employee. I like to know where they're at, how they think the conversation went, because I mean, HR moved over to people ops. And I think that it's such a people first job that I want to make sure that their conversation went well. And how do they feel after the conversation? Because sometimes there's always feedback you'll get from the employee that you didn't get from the manager. So like to have that conversation after. And then just the check-ins, making sure that there's either a weekly or monthly check-in, whatever the manager decided was the best way to go, making sure those are happening, and then also just checking in to see how it's going. So I know as an HR manager how it's going down the line.
That's great. And then Jenna, you also mentioned having optimism when you're having these conversations. I wanted to know, all of you, if you have any advice on keeping a positive and construction conversation when discussing performance improvement with an employee, to make sure they're not, kind of getting burnt out or losing momentum, to keep them inspired to improve.
I'd love to tackle this from like a no shame, no blame perspective. I think one of the things that I always ask is ensuring that individuals are clear on what their expectations are. And that feedback is actually truly a perception that other people have of how their work product or their behaviors are landing. So if somebody is perceiving that your work is not landing well, and the vast majority of people truly want to be the best that they can be, like they want to slay it. They want to like go out there and like be the best that they can. And so when they're working, they're not intending to have their work or their behaviors land in a way that is not optimal. So how do we make sure, like with that sort of thing, like their intent is good, and how do we make sure that they understand the perceptions of what their work is actually, what needs to be changed, and giving them having the conversation, engaging it as a two-way, like troubleshooting. how do we help you make adjustments and tweaks to your behaviors or your work product to ensure that it lands the way that you want it to land? And I think that's a really important way to approach the conversation versus like, I'm now going to sit down and read this thing that my like people business partner told me to read. And, here are all the things that we expect you to do. And here's how you're not doing them. Now you need to tell me how you're going to get from point A to point B. That kind of conversation can really, I think the vast majority of humans will actually be put on the back foot, and get defensive. So, your sort of fight or flight kicks in. But if you can go through and say, like, listen, we've got some folks who are actually perceiving your work and your product to actually land in this way, it changes that conversation. We know you want you to be your best. So, how do we go through and help you get from here to there and change the way that people are experiencing you?
I agree with that. And I think it's also important for management to always consider that, a person's experiences, their life experiences and work experiences, they bring all of that into the workplace with them. So, developing that relationship with them, always speaking to employees with respect, remembering that, they're humans. When they leave the workplace, they have their own challenges, at the end of the day, they have their own struggles that they're going through, and remembering, as you're working on progressive discipline with people, that they are human. And yeah, I think if you can build that relationship with your direct reports where they feel and they know that they can trust you and that you have their best interests in mind, they're a lot more willing to be open to having that conversation.
Yeah, and to piggyback off that, I just really like to understand where people are coming from, whether it's in their communication style or, like Jennifer said, what they're going through every day in their day-to-day life. Sometimes performance is a direct correlation to something going on in their family life. And obviously, especially on smaller teams, like we do need optimal performance, but at the same time, like what can I do to help you move through that? And then also, to maintain optimism, again going back to like the clarity, I think giving them an actual path to get there, I think it makes you leave a conversation optimistic instead of all of a sudden being like, okay, I have this performance improvement that I have to do, I don't know how to get there at all, and then you're on like overwhelmed. And I think when you're overwhelmed, typically for me as a person, I shut down. And I
Mhm.
know a lot of other people typically shut down as well. So I think having a plan to move forward, that's very clear and you know how you're going to get there, also helps to maintain that optimism, and then also probably helps to prevent burnout because they kind of know that the steps that they need to take to get to that next step.
I want to add in one more component of this before we move on too. I'm a big fan too, again, recognizing you two have both said this, where the person is in their life. I think it's always worth like when you're having the conversation, really kind of trying to gauge the temperature of the person and recognizing hearing it in that moment is often the sort of like, whole flood of, hormones and things that happen to kick in that create a space where someone might not be able to hear or react in a
Mhm.
way that they want to. So creating that space for them to actually take the information in and come back later, recognizing this is a human on the other side, and like sometimes this information can be very hard to hear, but also recognizing that even if you have optimism that they can actually get from here to there, they might not decide to want to do that. And creating that
Mhm.
space to have a very like mature adult conversation and say, here's the thing, like we think you can. We're optimistic on this, and we also recognize like if you're catching the sort of vibe, you have a choice here. We don't want to put you through this experience if you're like not feeling the vibe,
Mhm.
and like take this time to think about it. And if you're deciding this is not for you, this is not where I want to put in my work and my effort, we can have that conversation in a way that's like respectful and non-confrontational and all the things.
Mhm.
Like that's a really important part of it as well. Is just creating that space where people decide if they want to go through the process itself.
Mhm.
Great. We have some awesome questions popping over here in the Q&A, so I'm going to head over there. Let's see. Hi all, any advice on, as a manager working with superiors, to change their expectations of managers like myself to the views being expressed here, more direct, healthy feedback and an empathetic view?
That's a really good question. I think that one of the things that I can say is just have the conversation. A lot of times I feel like we work ourselves into a place where we're like, how am I going to say it? How's it going to be received? And I think if you can just get yourself into the room and start the conversation, then as it, rolls through organically, you will see that progress that you're hoping for. Hopefully, not all the time, but hopefully.
I think I'm really curious about that one. Like, are the hires up actually expecting there to be some sort of like confrontational, like shoe dropping type of feedback? And if that is the case, it's maybe if you're if you're trying to help change their view on what feedback can be and what is the most like first decide what your end, like this is everything with strategy, you decide what you want your end result to be. You want this person to succeed, you want your people to get the feedback that they need in order to change tack and like be more successful frequently. Fantastic, develop the skills to get there. If your leaders don't believe that that is something that's important, that they think that there's like a shoe dropping way to do this, and like, I don't know, I think back to like the 1980s, 90s, like, I mean, even just go back to like old movies. Office Space is a great one. Working Girl's another one. Like not kind environments, not compassionate, not accepting that there are humans on the other side. It was a different type of employment relationship. So if you look at those, like if they're operating in that way, I think it's worthwhile to bring in data to help individuals understand that like if your end result that you want to get is here, identify that, define it and articulate it. That method, like what's the best method? What is your strategy to get from here to there? And then how do you do it? And then bring in the data.
All right, Jenna, next one is for you. I like what you're saying about documenting. I like what you're saying about documenting these conversations. Would love to hear your thoughts about taking the scary out of documenting. I also feel like we put so much energy into skilling up the manager for documenting these conversations, but not a lot of resources for the managee about driving some of these conversations.
Yeah, that's a great question. And you said to take the scary out of it, correct?
Yes.
So I think I don't necessarily think these conversations even have to be scary from an employee side or a manager side. Sometimes they're uncomfortable to have, but I think again, if you lead with like clarity and optimism, like they don't have to be scary. It can be like how you want to help this employee get to the next level or how you want to help them perform better in their job. So I don't think it has to be this scary thing. I think receiving feedback, sometimes it's uncomfortable because you always want to succeed at your job. You always want to do the best. But I think also receiving this feedback like helps you become better. And then was the second part, how is a managee to better accept this? What was the second part?
Allowing the managee to kind of drive these conversations. So kind of going with documenting to how they can be a part of that and drive some of the conversations.
Right. And I think this goes back to what Julie was saying before about like letting it be a two-way street and also them saying, you know what, maybe this isn't something that I want to do. So I think giving them that time and space in between conversations to let them collect their thoughts and also go back to their manager to let them know, maybe this isn't the role for me. Maybe this is not a task that I want to take on, or maybe it's something that I just don't want to do. And being able to have that adult conversation, I think being able to like take the time and space after a conversation, you don't need to have a performance improvement conversation in one day and have all the answers by the end of it. Obviously it should be done in a timely manner, but you don't need to have all the answers in one day. So I think being able to give your manager space and also think about what you need as an employee is really important, and then go back with your thoughts on it.
Great. All right, we have just a couple more and then we'll hop into a demo. What is your advice to managers for approaching performance conversations with an employee who, one, might have an accommodations plan, two has experienced microaggressions in the workplace, Or 3, any other sensitivities in landing messages while honoring differences between manager and direct report.
I think in situations like this, sometimes these can become scary because we're rolling them sort of all into one ball. I think it's important to keep these issues separate from each other. An employee's accommodation is one thing. They can ask for an accommodation to allow them to perform the essential duties of their job, and we can do that. But performance still needs to be there, and holding performance separate from that, I think, is one of the safest things that you can do, because you can always fall back on whether or not the employee is performing where you need them to be. And that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with their accommodation. In the case of the microaggressions, I think that I would take separately. If an employee came to me and, regardless of anything else, said that they were experiencing microaggressions, I would want to have a conversation about that, and then probably do an investigation around what their experience is. And the third part of that, the sensitivities and landing messages while honoring differences between manager and direct report, I think I would want to know a little bit more about, is this manager where the microaggressions are coming from? Because if that's the case, then we need to have a conversation about what that looks like. And that may be a conversation or training for that manager as well.
Awesome. Julie, I think this next one kind of goes along with what you're mentioning about if an employee if you don't think they'll make it to the other side, whether it's worth kind of having those performance improvement conversations. So this one says, if we do not think someone will make it to the other side, but we don't have formally documented warnings and/or PIP, how do we ensure we have our backs covered going into termination if we skip PIP before going straight to termination?
Yeah, I mean, PIP isn't required to actually sever ways with anybody, but feedback is. And so I think that like, you can have documentation. I always encourage leaders to keep one-on-one documents. And I know that everybody operates differently. I've worked in really large organizations where they're like, we're going to drop in like one way of everybody's going to use this one methodology or this one platform for tracking one-on-ones. And like, I don't know, engineers are like, not touching that. Some other team is like, we've got this other thing that we've got already here. So let your leaders go through and use whatever tool works for them, first of all, but then make sure that when they're starting to have those conversations, that they're tracking them in a one-on-one documentation of when they're having those conversations. Ideally, the person that they're having these conversations with also has access to that documentation so that they can respond, they can add, they know that it's in there. There's some sort of documentation that's already in their one-on-one doc. If people are having conversations and it's not at PIP level, but they're like, you know what, I'm giving this feedback, they're not hearing it, like what we need is over here, and that leap is way too big, they're not going to be able to make it. Then what you can do is, if they're having these one-on-one conversations, is I always recommend for leaders to follow up with an email. So it's a conversation, but you're following up, and let's say you're following up and you're saying, okay, thank you so much, we just had this conversation, I just wanted to follow up and highlight some key points. 1, 2, 3 bullet points. I'm very here's the plan. This is what we agreed upon. 1, 2, 3. Looking forward to following up with you again next week. As always, let me know if you have any questions, how I can support you. That email is documentation. It doesn't have to be in a PIP. It doesn't have to be in a platform. It doesn't have to be in a system, but it is documentation. That manager either needs to BCC their people business partner, or they need to hold it in a file. But they should be using some sort of, it's like informal follow-ups, but that documentation counts for legal. So if I'm putting on my general counsel hat, which I'm not a general counsel, but if I've worked plenty with them, and if they're actually going through and saying, where's the documentation? All of those things count, as long as there's documentation of dates and what the conversation was. And there's the sort of, we talked about at the beginning, the clarity, like what happened and what are my expectations? And then where's the gap? All of that needs to be in there.
Great. All right, let's hop into a quick demo and then we'll get back into a few questions. I'm going to share my screen here. All right. So if you want to start a performance improvement workflow within AllVoices, you'll want to navigate to the related case. So you can either create a case or go to a case or a report that's relevant to the performance improvement workflow. You'll see performance improvement here within the case, and you'll select new. From here, you can type in issue names. So we can say something like Jeff missing quota. And we can say working to improve Jeff's performance. These are just examples. You'll want to write when the performance issue kind of started. So let's say we noticed it towards the end of last quarter. And then if you have your HRIS system connected, you'll be able to search the employee. If not, you would just type in the employee name. So let's say Jeff. You can select the primary issue here or select other if none of these apply. And then you'll be able to loop in the manager as well. So with the release of performance improvement, we've also added a new admin role within AllVoices for managers. So this allows them to view only the cases and performance improvement workflows they've been added to. So this allows HR to have most control over the AllVoices platform, but to loop in managers to see some of these conversations and allow collaboration so that they can work to improve performance for their direct reports. So from there, we'd click create. And you'll see here, it'll give an overall summary. You can go into status, so if it's new, in progress, or complete. And then action, we have a few of these that we've mentioned earlier in the call for first warning, second warning, or for just conversations and coaching. And then the great thing we have down here is all of these different documentation options. So we have add documentation where you can upload your own file. So whether this be a Slack screenshot, a dashboard screenshot of performance, or leads or anything like that that might relate to missing a quota. You can create your own blank document with any different sections, checklists, headers. But the best thing, the easiest thing is to utilize our templates here or create your own. So we have a formal performance improvement checklist. This allows the HR and managers to go through and make sure that they're standardizing the process and making a very fair process for all different employees. So it allows you to launch it, upload documentation, determine if a PIP is appropriate, how to write it, and all of these different kinds of tips. And then we also have the more formal performance improvement plan template. So for this one, this has the date department manager, and then this allows you to send this over to the employee and have them sign off on it to ensure that they're aligned on what the plan is. You're aligned as an HR leader or as a manager, and you're just looking forward to improving their performance, and you have that all documented. My favorite one personally is this coaching conversation and performance discussion one. So this is one that's great for maybe they don't have any performance issues that are glaring yet, but you just want to make sure you're keeping a pulse on it. So you can have these coaching conversations where you're scheduling one-on-one feedback, and then this second one really goes in tandem with what we've been saying about setting and encouraging an optimistic tone, kind of motivating the employee. And then the third one is a bit similar too, about having that two-way conversation and making sure that they have a voice in this process and they feel that they're involved rather than that you're dictating a process. So this one is my favorite, and it also has some other questions, some guiding questions to ask them during these conversations. But this one's my favorite because I think it really hones in on setting that tone, involving the employee, and making sure everybody's aligned before going into any more serious documentation. And finally, we have this activity log here. This will add any activity that you've had, whether it be changing the status or action or uploading documentation, just so that we make sure we have an audit trail if it were to come to something like we've mentioned earlier about covering yourself and making sure that you've committed all the right steps before a termination. And Jenna was actually super involved in this process from an HR perspective. She worked closely with products to make sure that we had all of the HR considerations in mind. So Jenna, I'll pass the floor to you if you have anything to add to this demo.
The only thing that I want to add, and this kind of goes back to the first question that was asked, like, how do you organize this? It's really nice that like kind of it's lined out for you. You also have different options, again, at the bottom with the performance improvement plan, the checklist, which is super helpful. Like, what do you need to go through? So that really helps you kind of like time out things, especially when you're a team of one, as that first question was. There's just a lot that goes into it, and there's also a lot going on in the day. So being able to have that checklist is super helpful. And then this goes back to what Julie was saying as well, when she was saying you don't need an actual performance improvement plan when terminating, you just need the documents. This is so helpful in keeping everything in one place, because I know previous to this, I would have folders or it kind of just lived in email. Being able to put this in one centralized place is so nice. So then if anything does happen, you do have it all in one centralized place.
Yeah, it's great too for if you do have your HRIS connected and you're typing in that employee, you'd be able to go to your employees tab within AllVoices and you'd be able to see everything related to a specific employee, every case that's mentioned, any performance improvement, any investigations, really to have all that in one place for employee documentation as well. All right. Awesome. Let's get back into some questions. So our tool really prioritizes the collaboration between managers and HR to improve an employee's performance together. I wanted to ask, does this collaboration make sense to you? And how do you feel this works in practice, given your experience?
Yeah, I have some strong views. I know that oftentimes leaders will look and say, okay, it's HR's responsibility for actually ensuring my people are performing. And I think that there's a really great opportunity here because while your HR leaders or people leaders have they have a lot of responsibility across the business, they can't be responsible for leading every single person in the organization. So when I think about where the responsibility where those kind of like separate out, I think it's your people team's responsibility for ensuring that leaders have the skills and the confidence to approach these conversations in a way that's going to be, aimed towards the best outcome and be supportive of their employees. That's the responsibility of the people team. So we can put all the tools in place, we can put all the trainings in place, and it's the responsibility of the leader to actually come to the well and drink. So we can lead them, but they've actually got to do the work. And so it's a partnership, and there's a clear line when that handoff happens, that actually I think can be better delineated, and putting some more responsibility on the leaders to step into leading their teams.
Mm-hmm. That kind of goes along with the other one, of how do you feel about the shared responsibility between HR and managers? I think that there can be a little bit of apprehension about having managers in the platform as well, but kind of knowing that they're only there to support and they can only see the cases and performance improvement workflows that they're added to, I think is a nice peace of mind for HR, just to give them a heads up, but to still kind of lead those conversations. Jenifer, you're on mute.
Sorry. I think that is also true. And I think that providing a tool like this for managers to use can take some of that just, paperwork nature out of what they're doing, allow them an experience that is easier and more functional and allows them to concentrate more on what they're actually saying and what they're actually doing to help their direct reports improve in, whichever area that they need to show improvement.
Yeah, I mean that sort of the guidance there on how to have those good conversations, that's so necessary.
Yeah, I thought that too. It's really nice.
Yeah, it's like perfect because people go in and they're like, how do I do the thing? You're like, okay, have you thought about all these things? These are things that you should be thinking about. And, if you don't know how to get there, like, here's some ways to think about it, but if you don't know how to get there, have a conversation with your people team, because they can help. Somebody asked a question about, like, well, how do you help people, leaders who are not, don't have the confidence to have these conversations? I typed in a response, it's like role playing is really fantastic. And so
Mhm.
what All Voices has done is put these sort of like, I'm going to plant the nuggets for the questions that you can ask, and then find someone to role play with.
Yeah, it's kind of like if we were sitting on their shoulder and saying, have you done this part? Have you done this part? And you know that every time they're seeing it, the more that they do it too, the more that it's just constantly going to be in their head.
And I think adding on to that, I think that that's also such a deterrent for people, managers, that sometimes they don't want to have the conversation. So it doesn't happen because it's uncomfortable. So if you're doing those role playing exercises where you dive into the uncomfortability, like then when it's actually time to have the conversation, you're confident enough that it is a structured conversation that's good for both parties, instead of one avoiding the conversation and then being like, well, I sent it in an email.
Mhm.
um and like we had this conversation this way, but having it like face to face or zoom to zoom in this world, um and having the confidence going into it, there's such a better success rate, because like one, you've practiced, and also like again going back to like optimism and clarity and transparency, like that lies there. That doesn't happen in emails or if you're avoiding the conversation altogether.
Mhm.
All right. And after all we've discussed today, I'm curious too how you'd like to see the performance improvement / performance management space change in the near future or in the next 5 years or so.
I think from my perspective, and one thing I talk with our managers about is, to help them develop an understanding that in regard to performance improvement, it's actually part of our responsibility as managers, as people managers, to work with them on performance improvement. Because if you're too afraid to have these conversations, or you're too afraid of what you might say, or if you say something wrong, then it sort of denies the employee the experience of that growth that they could achieve if you did have the conversation with them and they know that something's not working. I know, just considering my own professional history, there have been conversations that I have had with my supervisors that have helped me to see, I need to focus on this area because I need to grow in this area if I want to take the next step in my career.
Mhm.
I do really think that there's this incredible opportunity to look at all of the sort of foundations and the structures and the behaviors that come into play well before we get to a performance improvement conversation.
Mhm.
And I think that there's an incredible opportunity on that front, in terms of helping people understand clarity and expectations of what their roles are. Working to ensure leaders have the skills, leadership skills. It's becoming more and more evident that they have not accelerated at the same rate that we need them to accelerate, because I think the expectations and the needs of people have changed, and the way that we work has changed quite dramatically, accelerated, of course, in the last few years. So there's this great opportunity to go through and really work to ensure that people understand what they're working toward, that they have trust in their leaders, that they can help, that they're getting the feedback that they need to show up in the way that they want to show up. Like I said before, everyone wants to be their best. So let's help them be their best by holding that mirror up to them so they can make adjustments when those things are happening in play, not 6 months later, not 3 months later. Like,
Mhm.
can do it in real time. And this is the work that we're focused on, at Gravitate Partners, the company that I founded, in large part because there's this really important opportunity. How do we help people step into this, um, you know, advanced level of expectations? It's not hard; it's behavior change. So I definitely think that I'm an optimist, so lots of opportunity on that front.
Mhm.
And just to add on to what Julie said, I fully agree that these conversations should be happening throughout the employee life cycle. But I also do want to, like, moving forward in the performance improvement space, for leaders to realize that it's not the end of the employee's life cycle. I think that a lot of leaders are saying, okay, well, I'll put them on a PIP, or we'll have this performance
Mhm.
improvement conversation, just so I can get it on file so that we can terminate this person. I really want to move towards more of what Julie said and have those conversations throughout the life cycle of, and have them not look at performance improvement as the end of their time at the company. And I think this goes back to everything we've been talking about clear communication and understanding where people are coming from. And I think leaders need to lead with more of that rather than, okay, this is a problem. This is the end of their life cycle. How do we put this in writing?
That's great. All right, and finally, what advice would you give to companies on prioritizing these strong performance improvement conversations moving forward?
Do it. I mean, at a time where like talent attraction and retention, ensuring that you have engaged people in your workforce is like the golden egg of being able to ensure that you're going to actually meet your business objectives and deliver to your customers and your investors. So this is the front end of it all. This is not like the long tail. This is the, you know, the lead up, ensuring that your folks actually have the sort of feedback that they need to be the best that they can be, and that they're connected with the outcomes, and that they have trust in their leaders, and leaders are actually strongly supported to give that feedback. That's it. That's all you got to do. I mean, all you have to do. Just do
Yeah, I agree with that. I would say prioritize it, see it as an investment in your employees, and not something, you know, that you have to do or a box that you have to check so that you can do a termination. And I think definitely empower your managers to have these conversations. You know, the more empowered they feel, the more confident they feel, the better these conversations are going to be. You're going to see your turnover rates fall. It's, you know, going to be a lot less expensive than it would be otherwise. It's really important, and it's really good for an organization if you can do it and do it as right as possible.
Yeah, no, and I just agree with what both of them said. I think this goes back to the question where someone said it was scary. I don't think it needs to be a scary situation. I really think it can be great for the employer and the employees. Again, going back to manager training, getting managers, especially new managers, the proper training that they need. And this going back to role playing, I think that's such a great idea. So people get comfortable in those conversations so that the team can actually progress. And that's from a manager level as well as the person being managed level as well.
Great. All right. Well, thank you to our panelists and our participants and everyone who posed questions in the Q&A. We'll be uploading this webinar for those who could not attend, and look forward to seeing you all at the next one. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye, Allie.